Everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar, Business Recovery, Building Back Better, which I'm sure you'll agree is very timely following on from the Prime Minister's announcement yesterday evening. I'm John Quinton Barber, founder of Social, a communications agency based in Manchester, facilitating today's webinar, which has been hosted by the Growth Company and the Greater Manchester Local Enterprise Partnership. I'm delighted to be joined by Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester, Luke Hordwell, Co-Chair of Greater Manchester Local Enterprise Partnership, and Mark Hughes, Chief Executive of the Growth Company. Over the next hour, we're going to be highlighting the key challenges and opportunities facing Greater Manchester businesses as we head into the recovery planning in this COVID-19 time. If you'd like to join in and submit a question, please do so, and I'll try and ask as many as I can. If we're pushed for time, please be assured that your question will be captured and will form part of an FAQ, which will be uploaded online in the coming days. Before we begin, I just want to add a personal note that I too am a business owner with 40 colleagues to look after, and I know how tough it's been over the last few months. And I know how hard it's going to be with challenges ahead of us. So I've got a huge amount of empathy for everybody on this webinar. So please do get engaged, because this webinar really is to help people like you and I. So without further ado, Lou, I'm going to turn to you, and I just want you to introduce the Build Back Better campaign and let us know what it's all about.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. So people might have seen we launched something called Build Back Better last week, and you might also have seen that we've got some information, early stage information, on the Greater Manchester LEP website. So if you haven't been to that, then I'd urge you to go and sign up. And we're really genuinely interested in hearing from businesses, employees, around what better means for them. But just to talk a little bit around what Build Back Better means and how we see that evolving and growing over the coming months. So obviously, as we've seen and as we saw in some of the announcements from government today, we're in a strange moment in time where we're still really battling with the reality and the consequences of COVID-19 and what that's meaning for all of us in society and the business community included. And we've got to continue to support businesses and individuals and those affected most gravely, and to prepare for a safe return post-lockdown. But at the same time, we know we've got to start to plan for recovery, and we know that the earlier we begin to think about recovery and what shape we want that to take, the better chance we've got of delivering that. So Build Back Better has very quickly become a kind of mantra, I suppose, in all of our recovery thinking across Greater Manchester. And for us, really, in essence, it captures the idea that really, with some time to pause and think and step off the treadmill and have a look at the world that we've been living in for the last 20 years, there's an awful lot of us actually don't want to go back to normal. We'd rather go forward to something better. And so you may have seen in a recent survey a few weeks ago, only 9% of the UK actually wanted to return to life just as it was pre-COVID. And that's because that old normal really didn't kind of prioritise the things that the majority of us actually value. So as much as we're presented with a crisis, and it's a crisis that none of us would have asked for, we're also presented with an opportunity. And so in the true Greater Manchester spirit, we want to grab that opportunity and take the opportunity that this moment presents us with to rewire and redesign things better than they were whilst we've got the chance. So Build Back Better encapsulates exactly that. And the last few weeks have shown us the potential of what we can actually achieve. We can radically rethink how we do business. We can change the quality of the air that we breathe. We can be incredibly innovative about the new services and the new products and things that we begin to spin up. And that's in the most terrible adversity and really without any forward planning from most of us. Most of us were dropped into this situation. So what it does show us is our potential to rethink. So Build Back Better begins to start that movement, to start that conversation, to say, actually, what would better look like? All of those things that we've begun to set out in the local industrial strategy, those sectors that we'd begun to prioritise around clean growth, around digital, around health innovation, suddenly they feel even more pertinent, even more important. So for us, the local industrial strategy doesn't go away, but everything becomes wrapped with this idea of building back better together, working with business, working with citizens. So it's the beginning of a process, but I think our general sense is, from the reaction we've had from last week and the conversations we've had before that, we're definitely not alone in thinking this. And actually, there's a huge swell of the international business community and citizens generally who are beginning. Actually, there's probably something smarter that lies beyond this if we work together and we collaborate. And we really see that as Greater Manchester and the North's opportunity.
Brilliant, thanks, Lou. And for everybody on the webinar, there's a slide going up at the end with the web details as well. So that will be put up at the end. So do urge people to engage in that. Andy, I'm going to come to you now. Obviously, I'd suggest you've been very busy this morning, just to kind of get your perspective on Build Back Better, but also this recovery phase that we're now going to be entering into, and some of the challenges and I suppose opportunities that we're going to see ahead of us over the next few weeks and months.
Well, thanks very much, John. Good morning, everybody. It is certainly challenging. It feels challenging to be in my position this morning. I'm not wanting to be unduly negative about things. The government's got a very big challenge on. But I am, I'll be honest, struggling a little with what's been announced yesterday, because we don't have the guidance yet about workplaces, public transport, and yet there's been a lot more pressure on our public transport system this morning. So apologies if it sometimes feels as though I'm kind of out there with a negative challenge, but we've got to get the voice of Greater Manchester heard in this period. Otherwise, we could end up in a really complicated and quite messy situation. And I am going to be making those arguments today, because this needs to be thought through. We won't build back better unless we really think through what lies ahead of us and plan for it. And I think it needs really careful thinking and planning. It also needs more support for business. So just to say something on that, John, before I get into what the great things that Lou said about Build Back Better, because obviously we can't have those high ambitions if we haven't got the here and now sorted out. We've made an argument through colleagues at the Greater Manchester Combined Authority for more support for businesses, particularly those who can't access the business rates grant. So we're going to be bringing forward details of a scheme to allow more access to that, particularly those who rent and have business rates as part of their rent or work in shared workspaces. So that hopefully will be coming forward this week. And I think we've also got to make a big argument about the furlough scheme, because we're getting to a point here where if you think of the end of June as the sort of current cliff edge for the furlough scheme, if people are thinking about possibly having to make redundancies, it would be this week, really, I think, where they would start to have to initiate that process. So again, to allow the planning, we think the government needs to give more clarity on these things, and I'll be making that argument as well this week. But just then to turn to the bigger picture and to follow on from what Lou said, I'm really grateful to Lou and the LEP for leading this discussion. I think it's fantastic that we've got our LEP out there sort of inviting people to think about building back better. Of course, some of it is what government needs to do, both local and national, but it's almost an invitation to everybody to rethink what they do. Individuals, organizations, everybody can rethink things coming out of this. And in some ways, we're going to be forced to do that, John. So let me give you an example. The sheer numbers of people on our pavements because of social distancing and the inability to use public transport in the way that we normally would means that we've brought forward a quick scheme around reallocating road space to cyclists and pedestrians. And also we're looking at accelerating the building of the B network developed by Chris Boardman, our Cycling and Walking Commissioner. That is just a very tangible and practical example of the need to build back better and build back differently. And of course, the Prime Minister and the government made statements around that extra space being given to cycling and walking at the weekend, and we very much agree with that. So that's a change that's already coming, and our 10 councils are working on that. Another example of change that is coming anyway, and it's rather than it being just forced on us and finding it difficult, it's why it's an opportunity to think back better, is basically the restructuring of the Greater Manchester working day. The capacity that we'll be able to run on public transport won't allow us to move the same numbers in and out of the city centre on a daily basis or at the morning peak and evening peak as we ordinarily would. So, of course, we're going to have to ask businesses to limit the numbers of people coming into the office, but also thinking about flexible start and end times to the working day. Greater Manchester has a very traditional 9 to 5 working day. And this is an opportunity to rethink that, to make transport work in this period, but also to give people a better quality of life, possibly. Let's allow more home working. That is an example of building back better. If we do give people that flexibility to work from home, if they are able to do that, you then get into bigger questions about digital infrastructure alongside the cycling and walking infrastructure. And I think together with Lou and the LEP, we will want to make a big pitch to the government to take our full fibre scheme, which is beginning to be rolled out from the 40 to 45% coverage we're anticipating at the moment to much more comprehensive coverage around Greater Manchester. Another example of building back better and using this as a moment to make change. Employment standards is important too. I will make this point that in an era like this, I think we've all been able to look at the world with new eyes, and we've looked at some people still out at work running the country who have least security in their employment arrangements. And something for me that characterises Greater Manchester is that it's always been a place that has looked at economic progress alongside social progress, and how do we give everybody security at work and fair reward, so that we then can lift productivity, because it's a productivity issue as well, isn't it? The lack of security at work sometimes damages productivity. So putting the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter at the heart of things as we come back, and perhaps linking it, if there's going to be ongoing business support over the next year or so, linking it to the Good Employment Charter, I think is something that we'd be very keen to work with you on. I'll probably finish there, John, but just to say one final thing really that echoes what Lou said, and it's the way in which things can change and the speed of innovation that is possible when you really need to. I mean, we kind of in normal times put things off and talk about them and they don't really move forward. But actually in this instance, the speed with which we've made radical changes, I think is something that we should celebrate. So take homelessness, in a matter of weeks, we have accommodated over 1,300 people in single room provision across Greater Manchester, a massive change in a really short space of time. Or looking in the digital space, we've finally gone to a position where we've got agreement to have a single health and care record for all 2.8 million citizens of Greater Manchester. A massive change, something that is a very valuable asset for us, and is something that has kind of been brought on by the situation that we're in, alongside a new digital system for care homes and monitoring what's going on in care homes, alongside the incredible innovation that has been United We Stream. Our nighttime economy advisor Sacha Lord created a platform with his counterpart in Berlin. We've been broadcasting Greater Manchester's cultural offering to the world since lockdown began. I'm told on Saturday the Hacienda House Party Part 2 had over 1 million viewers. Think about that, how quickly that has kind of come through. And I would say that's an example of building back better, because I'm sure we'll want to keep that platform to support our venues and our nighttime economy going forward. So I suppose the point is, it's not pie in the sky to say, well, how can we build back better? We've already done it in many ways, and we've made practical changes in recent weeks. So have businesses switching their production to the things that we've needed through this period. So it's a very real conversation, and it's useful for me this morning to hear from you about what could I do that would help you join this conversation about building back better. So I'll leave it there, John, and hand back to you.
Thank you, Andy. I think there's no denying the amount of work that's gone on over the last, I think it was about 6 weeks since we all last met, the last webinar, and it's just been constant and positive. And actually, for businesses like ours and businesses on the webinar, to see that happening is reassuring. Let me tell you that from the business community. Thank you for your questions that are coming in fast and thick and fast. I'm going to turn to quite a few in the coming minutes, but I'm going to give Mark Hughes from the Growth Company an opportunity to talk about some of the some of the initiatives that's been going on. And again, Mark, I don't think you've slept over the last 7 weeks, because the things that are actually going on from the growth company and the help and support that's happening, you know, I have to say, from a business has been immense. So just talk us through, I think, from your perspective, though, some of the challenges that are going to be faced in the coming days and months from what you see, and some of the solutions and opportunities that you're working on and that we're looking at.
Okay, thanks. And obviously try and relate it to what Andy and Lou were saying about the here and now and the Build Back Better. I think just I guess to remind that whilst we think about the future, businesses are really still grappling with today. We know probably from our own survey work, 90% of businesses still adversely affected by COVID, revenue, cash, supply chain being the kind of key three issues right now. I think as we move into the restart phase, and we need to really make sure that's a safety first led restart into this. So that's the sort of second set of issues that people are now grappling with. How do we restart in a safe manner? I think that really should have gone along with much clearer announcements yesterday around transport, test, tracking and tracing, schooling and PPE equipment, 4 key elements of a return to work approach that didn't really get much airtime. Also some niche areas that people need to think about in terms of availability of finance, things like trade credit, what's happening to trade credit insurance right at the moment. And clearly a bit back to the kind of safety and health led. Clearly, that's not just about a physical health consideration, but a mental health consideration for employees returning to work and those still working at home, as it were. I think a third area would be how do we exit the current support schemes? Andy's already touched on this in terms of furlough. How we exit furlough must be the biggest issues that we now face, both in terms of making the recession less deep and quicker out of it. So will we have a differential approach to maybe some different sectors like health, leisure and tourism? But I think importantly, introducing a part-time element into restarting people coming off furlough, which manufacturers and many others will greatly welcome. I think for all businesses now, we have to adjust to what the new normal is going to be. So every business is going to have to look at its business model right the way from appreciating that we're now living in a is it completely contactless world, or a world in which physical contact needs to be protected for. So simple things like pressing buttons in lifts, opening doors. How do you deal with that, as it were, right the way through to changes in supply chains, whether that's reshoring to reduce the risk in that, or actually onshoring in other locations because you want to be closer to your market. So health is everybody's business now. Resilience in the way that you do business is a key thing. And again, as Andy talked about, innovation. Everybody's innovating different products, different services, different partners at the moment. So just going back to fundamentals in your business model, I think is really important. And also realizing that there are many more opportunities out there now emerging in the way that we will do business going forward. So we're already seeing in GM new services being introduced, new products being introduced into the market, and therefore we're very keen to work with businesses both who are struggling with today's issues, but also looking at tomorrow's opportunities. And again, I would just call out, contact the Growth Hub, whether on the website or the telephone number, and we've got a whole bank of advisors directly and importantly working with other partners, other business organizations, other support organizations to work with businesses during this period.
Thank you, Mark. You mentioned furlough in there. Andy, I'm going to come to you now. We've had a specific question here. This is from Jenny from Manchester Gin, Spirit of Manchester Distillery. It's a question for Andy. What's your expectations with the extension of furlough? And what are you going to push for in terms of longer term for the hospitality industry? That's come from Jenny. So thank you for that question, Jenny.
Well, no, thanks as well, Jenny. I mean, I think we've got to recognise that some sectors will take longer to come back than others, and therefore we need a very flexible approach to furlough from the government to have this, we heard the Chancellor saying last week that it's not sustainable and it's going to have to end soon. Well, if it does end in July, that is a cliff edge that the hospitality industry will go over, and we will struggle to revive it. So I'll certainly be calling for, we need an extension, I think, and that needs to be announced this week, John, because as I said, if you're kind of building back from the end of June, 45-day notice period or redundancy consultation would come this week, as far as I can work out, or very soon anyway. So we need clarity again from the government. Now, it might not be that there's universal access to the furlough scheme. It might now need to become more focused on the sectors that might need that help for longer. But certainly we need to be making those arguments publicly to the government. I find it really hard to see how they could just kind of stop it now, particularly when we wouldn't be anywhere near back to full capacity in tourism, leisure, hospitality, for instance. So maybe it's one I need to work with my fellow mayors in the other cities, because I think it's going to be crucial to make that case to the government. It's linked, of course, to the guidance that we're all waiting for. So that will tell a lot of people about how many people they can have in the office, and then they'll need to say, well, what do we do for those we can't get into the office because of the requirements for distancing? Again, the furlough scheme, I think, needs to be able to pick that up. And if there's a part-time furlough option as well, that we need to look at that. So people working half the week rather than all of the week. I think these things are quite urgent now, and I think we need to put the case to the government, John, for as I say, a flexible approach that will sort of recognise the different challenges that companies have, and stick to the logic of furlough. The logic was support as much of the economy now in this difficult year so that we can revive. We'll have more to revive once we get through it. It feels to me to defeat the object to sort of put in this very short-term support and then withdraw it at the end of June, because that will be too soon and it will have almost kind of gone against the kind of very idea that you brought it in for in the first place. So all I can say on the call this morning is I will make the case to government this week for an extension to furlough, but particularly looking towards the rest of this year for those industries that will most need support.
Thank you, Andy. And again, there's a couple of comments on the questions there, or reflections about childcare and schools going back and people, balancing that as well. So there's all sorts of things yet to work through, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think just for the panel, I think if there's a question coming about risk assessment here, and thank you to Tony for this. And there's quite a few about risk assessments coming up in the question panel. Basically, Tony's saying, how do we check our risk assessment meets current government guidelines? And is there support for cost of implementing control measures in our factory? So I'm not sure if you can answer anyone today, but go for it, Mark.
Well, I won't be able to give all the answers today, but I think we need to kind of remember here that every business is meant to do a risk assessment for their business anyway, under the Health and Safety at Work Act, as it were. And all businesses who employ more than 5 people are meant to have that in a documented form, as it were. So risk assessment isn't a new thing and shouldn't be a new thing for businesses. So don't in a sense overcomplicate that and think it's something new and something different. Yeah. The Health and Safety Executive also do helpfully provide a wide range of templates and toolkits on their website that people could look at. We will, by the end of today, have a risk assessment template on the Growth Hub website as well. So there's places to go there. And again, I would refer people on the webinar to go to the Growth Hub itself. And there will be people there who will be able to kind of begin to help and talk through that. But again, obviously, it depends on the unique and individual circumstances of every business. But don't shy away for it because of the term risk assessment, as it were. Yeah. And in terms of whether there's actual financial help to assist the implementation of that, there isn't, as far as I'm aware yet, a kind of scheme that says if on the back of your risk assessment you've got to do these different things and that's going to incur a cost and then there's funding to do that. That doesn't exist, as it were. but there's absolutely nothing to stop you using some of the existing grant and loan schemes to meet some of that cost if you did have a cost.
Thank you, Martin. Whilst I've got you, there's another question coming. Oh, sorry, Andy, I beg your pardon.
It was just to say, John, that myself and the 10 leaders of Greater Manchester endorsed the idea of a safe GM campaign.
Right.
And that would be obviously safe on public transport, safe in workplaces, safe in and around the city in terms of, you know, space for pedestrians. The reason why I'm mentioning that, and why I would encourage everyone to sort of think of safety first in terms of how you come back to work, it's going to be really important for the city region to project that image of safety first, to bring the visitors back and bring the overseas students back. You know, that is, I think, a big part of confidence in the city and in its businesses, that we're all collectively building out a safety first approach. It's why I'm afraid I have, you know, some disagreements with what was announced yesterday. It didn't feel a safety first approach to me, because we don't have the guidance. And I'm told this morning that our trams are pretty full this morning. You know, we haven't had time to plan, you see. So for me, you know, I think this is where we are all in it together, if I can put it that way, because we all have a vested interest, I think, in projecting a kind of message about the city that we're a safe place to come to. You know, we've got the testing, the mass testing, the contact tracing. I've no doubt we might have to say something about face coverings coming out of what is said later. You know, we should always be doing it, but doing it plus is what I would say, because of that, you know, building that confidence and that kind of invitation for people to come to a city that does things in the right way.
I understand that, Andy. And Lou, I'm going to come to you on this as well, because I think it's a segue into this about well-being as well for employees. You know, the announcement yesterday about if you can work from an office, if you can work from home, work from home. If you can't, you know, go into work. I mean, what have you got any thoughts about how we can, you know, look after our colleagues' well-being on that? Because it's a big thing.
I think it is, and I think this is definitely where, obviously, with some public sector support, this is where employees can rewire their own thinking, and some organisations are already really progressive on this and have been doing some of the stuff that we all need to do for quite a long time. But we know that it's going to be about a different way of thinking about what well-being is. You know, I think well-being has been thought about as either your pension plan or your gym membership. You know, now we know it's a much more holistic thing, and we also have seen that actually, you know, surprise, surprise, it turns out that the health of the nation is intrinsically connected to the economic performance of the nation. You know, so those two things are now highly connected, and we've seen that kind of writ large over the last few weeks. I think what I hope is going to happen is that employees will recognise that there needs to be a kind of phased approach, in the same way we're going to need to think about, ideally, phasing our way out of a furlough-based kind of economy. And I saw one of the questions down the side. I was just looking, somebody was saying, what happens if my employer wants me to return, but the schools aren't open? So, you know, the reality is employers are going to have to try and create some flexibility. And like I say, some are already amazing at this. But actually, what's, you know, and Andy talks about, we're quite 9 to 5, we're quite old fashioned actually as an economy. And so what's been amazing to me is that people who've never worked remotely before, never used some of these online tools, are suddenly saying, actually, this is way more productive. And so I think the real shame would be is if we just twang back as soon as we can all be in an office 5 days a week. Doesn't mean we should. And I think, guess what? People actually want to see their kids. They would like to sometimes be home for dinner. They don't necessarily want to spend their lives on trains and planes. And I think there's aside from being a green benefit to that, there's a psychological and a mental well-being benefit that actually benefits our children and our families as much as it benefits us as individuals. So I think we've got this really rare moment where we've got actually probably more clarity on things than we've probably ever had. We've stepped off the treadmill, and we could actually reshape our businesses. And certainly for a lot of small businesses, as business owners, this is in our gift to just rethink these things. We don't have to apply to HQ. We don't have to ask for the shareholders' permission. You know, we can rewire it, and guaranteed there are productivity benefits. So this isn't, you know, be a profitable business, or are you going to have happy and physically and mentally well employees, the two things are completely connected, just as they are on the macroeconomy. So I would love to think that the businesses of Greater Manchester, for all the reasons Andy's described, this is right in our DNA, the idea that our sole purpose is not just to make money at any cost, that actually we do care about our social remit. But I think more than ever, the remit of business is going to be right in the heart of the community and in helping citizens to have a good quality of life. So I think Greater Manchester can lead that way. I really do believe that.
I love that, Lou, and that is Build Back Better in action, isn't it? That's fantastic. While we're on Build Back Better, a question's come through, and thank you for that. Just a very quick one about the deadline for submitting any ideas. Have you got that? Do you know when that is?
No deadline. It's going to be an process. This is going to be a conversation we have for a long time, but the sooner people can join the conversation, the better. Fantastic.
I want to turn to the economy. There's a few questions about the economy, and obviously people are thinking about recession and deep recession and what happens next. So, Mark, I've got a question for you on the economy, which has come from Mark, I think at Caritas. The economists are predicting a short, sharp and deep recession with an equally quick recovery over the next 12 to 24 months. What extra safety net can Manchester businesses put in place to support people who will suffer from this, hopefully, short recession? And anyone else, please panel after Mark.
Okay. Well, I think first of all, I would just question the original assumption in that as to whether or not we're good. And I don't want to get into alphabet soup as around this, but whether we are going to have a V-based recession, as it were. It would be great if we do, in some respects. Not great that we're having a recession, obviously, but great that bounce back would be quick and sharp, as it were. But I think we do have to kind of question, whether it is going to happen in that way, and therefore measures that we put in place need to reflect, the plan of, hope for the best and plan for the worst kind of approach, as it were. I think in terms of the responses, though, they need to be a mixture of immediate, long-term, and things that support the objectives that Andy and Lou were talking about in terms of the nature of the type of economy we want to have when we come back. So how do we build, more sustainable economy when we come back? But a lot of the immediate measures will actually be around supporting people with training and income in that transitory period. So, we are going to find that some people's jobs no longer exist as a result of this, because there'll be increasing digitization, increasing automation, possibly as a result through the different behaviors and practices that we have. Therefore, where are those people going to find jobs in the future? Hopefully, we'll find more jobs in a greener economy. So Andy's talked quite a lot about, environmentally sustainable house building programs, as it were, which there would need to be a new skill set to do that. So what we need to devise are better schemes than we've had in the past to retrain people going forward. And can go back to the furlough question, and other countries have done this. Can you translate furlough from a job sort of retention scheme into a job retraining scheme? Because it's very unlikely that every person on furlough will return back to work. And the hardest thing about getting people back into work is how long they remain unemployed. So can we devise a mechanism that would allow one to move from one position to the other without dropping into long-term unemployment? I think that's a key issue for us going forward.
It's good to think that you're thinking that way, Mark. Andy, I'm going to bring you in on the economy and get your thoughts on that.
Well, I very much agree with what Mark's just said, John. It's going to be really challenging, no doubt about it, as Mark said. Picking up on what Lou was just saying, ideas that come through Build Back Better. I mean, just so people understand this, at some point I'll be turning those into an ask of government, because we are going to be asking for a specific GM recovery plan, and hopefully flexible funding behind it, so that the LEP, myself and the GMCA can can act to support the economy in ways that we might need to because of the particular challenges that recovery poses for us compared to a place that has a different economy. I think it is going to be a very different process in different places, and we want to be sort of making those asks of the government to support job creation, because Mark's right. I think the old approach of just sort of letting people sort of drift back to work whenever is, I don't think, going to work really. We're going to have to become quicker at reskilling people. So I mentioned digital infrastructure before. And clearly that is something that could be scaled up because we're already doing it. So there could be job opportunities there. But also, as Mark was saying, the retrofitting of properties. If we're going to hit our zero carbon target of 2038, we have to get on with that. We have to do that. And we may as well start now. So again, use funding to retrain people in those specific skills, and build out a retrofitting program across Greater Manchester that might be kind of primed by the public sector, but eventually could be picked up by the private sector. So this is some of the thinking that I think we're going to have to get into quite quickly. And this is what Build Back Better means. It's not just that you're creating jobs for people, but they're jobs in the areas where we need to make significant changes. And as Lou was saying, we capture that ongoing benefit to the environment. So it's a challenging sort of question, John. I think the best answer I can give is the pitch we're going to be making to the government is for flexible, devolved funding, more power over skills, so that we can move quickly to put some of these ideas into effect.
Thank you, Andy. You mentioned there digital infrastructure, and that kind of leads into another question about the creative industries that I'm going to just put to you now, because Manchester, Greater Manchester, is famed for its creative industries, and there's a question here from Stephanie. So thank you, Stephanie, for the question. And basically, the question is basically, prior to COVID, creative industries was the fastest growing sector, but now it's most vulnerable. Is there a strategy to specifically ensure this sector survives?
Well, it's a good question, and she's absolutely right. Heart of what we're all about, the creative industries are at the heart of that. It's a reason that people come to the city. They promote brand Manchester, Greater Manchester around the world, so they're crucial to us. And it's why I have supported Sasha and United We Stream, because it's a way of raising the profile of our industries. But he's also, in the great scheme of things, not a huge amount of money, but still, £250,000 has already been raised to support. Fantastic initiative. So we are absolutely clear about the importance. We released, we paid up full in front actually on some of the cultural grants, John, that we'd already awarded. We've given some extra creative commissions to try and support people. So we are doing what we can, but obviously it is going to be challenging, and it's hard to say, isn't it, when we're going to look at gigs happening again, or the Royal Exchange reopening. It's just that's going to be hard, isn't it? And the same with football, to be honest. The Premier League are meeting today. I think I find it hard to see how, and I'm not just saying this out of bitterness around Liverpool, but I do see hard to see how the league season can resume when you have 3 Brighton players tested positive for coronavirus. One of them just yesterday. When are we going to bring football back anytime soon? What is the impact on not our Premier League clubs, but our Championship and lower league clubs, Wigan, Oldham, Rochdale? Football and music and the creative industries are at the heart of our city region, aren't they? And I think we need to start thinking more seriously about a creative industry strategy to help people, but also a sports and football strategy to protect everybody through this, because it's an infrastructure, a whole infrastructure here that we need to protect.
It is, and just to touch on that, which I find very encouraging, and other webinar viewers should find this encouraging. What you said there, Andy, is that you are going to be making an ask of government based on some of the responses from Build Back Better, some of the kind of consultations, some of the suggestions there, and obviously Stephanie, creative industries, I'd be suggesting get your thoughts into that. And do you want to just pick up on that, Lou, at that point there?
Yeah, so I was having this conversation on Friday. I think so reassure of the local industrial strategy, which will be a huge blueprint for our recovery and is evidence-based and has become even more crucial overnight. Creative and digital sits with one of those key 4 quadrants that we know is absolutely critical to, and therefore to economic recovery. Interestingly, the digital part of that is probably, we know, going to be presented with new opportunities, but the creative part of that, and they're not entirely separate, is going to need some quite radical overhaul and transformation and investment. So if you look at the art world, and I was talking to some galleries last week who have been considering how they might have an online presence for years, within a matter of weeks have had to make that investment, or they're not going to be able to sell any art, they're not going to be able to showcase their artists. So, but the reality is that's going to need money. So we're going to need to make an ask of government for the creative industries, which are critical to Brand UK, let alone Brand Manchester. They're a key part of our brand equity. They're a key export, and they're going to need support, financial support and skill support to deliver that level of transformation, which is, quite alien. And in my experience, unless you're part of a huge multinational network, businesses like ours, you might have been around a long time, but we're not sat on 2-3 years worth of capital. Most creative industries are fairly hand to mouth, so you need some support through that bridge, because on the other side of this is actually more opportunity for those organisations, not less, but we've got to support them through this really difficult transition period.
Thank you, Lou. And again, thank you to everyone for your questions. There's quite a lot coming in, which is brilliant. And I said right at the beginning, if we can't answer your question, or if the panel, if we can't get around to asking your question, they will be captured and they will be turned into an FAQ, which will go online later this week, and details about that will come at the end. So thank you so much for engaging. It's really good for you to spend your time watching and listening to this, and it really helps shape, as you've heard, policy going forward, which is great. But I want to, Andy, I've got one about key workers here, which I want to touch on. It's come from Nat. So Nat, thank you for this question. And that's saying, what about the key workers, some of whom are low skilled? How do you see conditions changing for them? For example, living wage rather than minimum wage, permanent contracts rather than 0 hours. And Andy, do you want to pick up on that point?
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about this, John, at the moment. See, I think we've maybe all looked at the world with new eyes, haven't we, in recent weeks? And it seems to me that some of the most undervalued workers in the economy are also now what we call essential workers. And there seems to me to be a contradiction there. If you are essential to the good running of food distribution, supermarkets, care home, if you're crucial to those sectors, surely you need a contract and pay that supports you to be in work every day, and and not subject to sort of 0 hours and all the rest. For me, that is a contradiction in our economy. If you take a really tangible example, let's look at care. So Unison Northwest did a survey of about 2,500 of their care workers, and we know that many of them are very low paid to begin with. But they found, and this was University of Kent did the research. It was really kind of it was a very high quality piece of work. They found that 80% of them said that they feared they would not be paid statutory sick pay if they needed to self-isolate through this crisis. So they further found that there was evidence that some people had been in work when they should have been self-isolating and had obviously passed the virus on. Now, you've got to ask yourself, if we have a part of our economy, the care sector, and if it doesn't pay people in that sector enough to prioritize their own health, and therefore by definition the health of the people they care for, then something clearly is wrong, I would say. And the thing that is wrong is not necessarily the businesses and what they do, although some I don't think handle things properly, but many do. I think what's wrong is it's the failure of both political parties, to be honest, to reform social care over decades, and they've left it in this position in a way that it couldn't withstand what's been thrown at it now. So I do think Build Back Better does need to go into the territory of employment standards. I personally believe that we have been overvaluing work in the top half of society or the top half of organizations for 10, 20 years and undervaluing people's work in the bottom half of organizations. I just, this can sound like quite radical to some people, but actually I don't think it is, because the smaller the gap between the lowest paid person in your organization and the highest, I think the more likely it is that you will have a sense of common cause and fairness about things and more team spirit as a result. So these things aren't just like sort of, dangerous political ideas. I think they're good for business if there's a sort of stronger sense of morale and fairness, and I think we've lost sight of that in this country over recent times. When I made a commitment to donate part of my salary when I became mayor, I was not asking any great kind of credit for it. It's just simply I was sending a message that I think we need to rethink things here about the conditions in which some people are living at the bottom and the rising homelessness that we can all see, and how much some people are paid. And I'm not just talking about private sector organizations, by the way, it's public sector too. Now, I personally feel we should be leading a debate here about how do you really shore up work for people, particularly in those essential sectors, so that they've got enough money to live on, because we know lots of them are paid below the real living wage, and they have a degree of security in their employment arrangements that means that they are not hand to mouth, and that that they've got that sort of peace of mind going forward. And I don't think we've got these things right in recent years. And I think getting them right isn't just about doing right by people and society. It can actually be good for business as well, good for business productivity.
Agreed, Andy. I think Good Employment Charter was, may I say, the start of all of this before pre-COVID times, and something to sign up to. Lou, I'm going to come to you for your comments on that. And then, Mark, I'm going to come to you just to talk a little bit more about mental health and wellbeing, because there's a few questions on there, and also maybe to talk about some future webinars that will cover that off in the coming weeks. But Lou, just to kind of talk about some of the low income stuff that's being talked about.
Yeah, so I think if we don't look at the situation that we've just observed in the last 2 weeks, and with any shred of humanity see the level of insanity in having people without whom we don't have food, we don't have care for our elderly, we don't have clean offices, we don't have clean. But if we don't see that and realise that those people should not be devalued to the level that they have become, then there really is something wrong with us. And I don't think Greater Manchester will look at that and see anything other than something that needs to be changed. But to build on Andy's point, there's obviously a massively important role for government, both at a national and local level, but there's a massively important role for business here. And this is the time where business can step up and completely lead the way. And I think it comes down to, how do you define success? So this idea, which is in the history of business relatively new, that we only define success by how much shareholder value we create for the people at the top, is complete nonsense and completely out of date. And if you can only have a viable business by squeezing everybody else in it to the point that they can't afford to live, then you don't have a viable business. And the things we should be proud of are, you hear some great people talk about enoughness. And the question is, can you build a business where there's enough for the people who've risked their capital and worked every hour and founded the business, or whatever that shareholder construct is, there's enough reward for them to continue to do that and continue to invest in other businesses. But there's also enough for everybody else in that machine. And that really is about the purpose of a business. The purpose of a business is not just to make the money for the guys at the top. The purpose of the business is to provide a great living for everybody who works there, and a good quality of life, and be proud of what they're doing and have great colleagues and all that stuff, and learn and develop, as well as to create sustainability for the business by making money for everybody who's put the capital in. So we've got to radically rethink, and that's not a political ideology, that's just a human ideology, to say that is quite wrong. And we've just seen that for the last 2-3 months right under our nose. And if we don't do something about it now, then this isn't the Greater Manchester I know, because I've talked to so many people over the last few weeks who really, really, really want to radically change that situation.
Lou, thank you for that. Really passionate, fantastic. Mark, I'm going to come to you, and then panel, I'm going to give you're going to have a minute, 60 seconds to wrap up. Unfortunately, coming to the end. some final thoughts, I suppose, just going into the week that we're going into, and perhaps some of the still unknowns, and just to give us some thoughts on that. But Mark, very quickly around about mental health, well-being, and future webinars that people may be able to access.
Yeah, if I may, just a quick detour question that Louise has raised around apprenticeships, because I don't think young people have been given enough of a call out in this issue. You know, apprenticeships have really gone off a cliff in terms of starts, as it were. But again, we know that the future, the young generation, again, from past recessions, gets hit particularly badly. And I think, again, more attention needs to be given as we come back to this next phase of restarting as to how young people are incorporated in that restart and build back better. But to go to the mental health point, and I think, you know, Lou's called it out, Andy's called it out. We are now all much more conscious of the mental health component to our lives, as it were. I think, and we need, as businesses, we need to think about that for the mental health of people returning to work, the anxiety that they may have, but also the people who are still working from home as well. So, you know, we've got to look at more diverse groups when we're thinking about mental health. I think there's just there are quite a good range and good quality online support tools that are out there, and an increasing number of webinars that are talking to this agenda. We've got a forthcoming webinar series that will focus on work settings and how the forthcoming rules might work in different work settings, but also on current themes, as it were. And mental health will be one of those themes. It'll be on our website as to when that is exactly in the next week or so. But there'll be other themes in there around cybersecurity, because again, in this period of time, a lot more attacks and issues in that arena, plus some of the more day-to-day things that I mentioned earlier around cash flow and supply chain issues as well.
Great. So I think the key message there is keep checking back to the Business Growth Company or the Growth Company's website. Just going to turn to you, Lou, first, about just give me 60 seconds of wrap up, really, and in 60 seconds, what you think this next few weeks is going to hold.
So I think we're in an odd situation where we're still dealing with the crisis, and we've all got to start to think about recovery, and one of those feet requires absolute reality and looking at the situation and being practical on a pretty much a daily basis. The other requires some optimism and a view around where the opportunities sit. So I think we've got some amazing resources in GM, not least through Mark and his team, which, as you say, have worked tirelessly to produce all of the support that we're seeing coming out. We've only really just begun the recovery planning, and I think you'll see more from Greater Manchester. But my big ask is for the business community to step forward and be part of that, and to work with us through the Greater Manchester LEP, through Mark and his team, to help us shape this and help us kind of show the world what better looks like.
Thank you, Lou. Mark, I'm going to come to you, then finally you, Andy.
For me right now, it's about how to make a bad situation worse. So it's really about the clarity of the restart, and then how we come out of these schemes, because we've got an opportunity here to make the recession less worse than it could otherwise be. So I think some real clear decisions around that are really needed from central government at this point in time.
Thank you, Mark. And finally, Andy.
I think, I hope people got a sense of Build Back Better from this discussion, John. So let's just make it really clear about what it means. It means cleaner air, keeping the cleaner air that we've all been experiencing. So myself and the leaders agreed on last week, Thursday, to push on with our plans for a clean air zone in Greater Manchester. So that is an obvious example of, and that might be business support, because we might be able to give grants to companies to change their vans, or taxi companies to change their vehicles. So that's a very tangible thing. More active lives. Let's try and keep more active living for everybody, building out that cycling and walking infrastructure. That's a Build Back Better. Hopefully less congestion. And as Lou said, all of that time spent on those crowded roads or trains. If we're going to reshape the working day, allow more flexible start times for people, or more home working, that I think could be Build Back Better for everybody. Kickstart the green economy. I think this, if we're ever going to do it, now feels to me to be the time to do it. A proper legacy on homelessness, having brought so many people inside, it's a chance to turn a lot of lives around, and that is linked, of course, as I said, John, to better employment standards, so we don't go back to a world which is really insecure and it's very easy for people to kind of fall over and end up on the streets. So, you know, I think Build Back Better is a real thing. It's going to be challenging, as Mark says, but we can make positive changes within all of this, and I think Greater Manchester is well placed to lead it. And Lou and I talk a lot about this. You know, it is in our branding that we do that, economic and social progress together. And I think if we can carry on doing what we've been doing in recent times, it kind of, I think it promotes this as an attractive place to live and to invest, because, you know, it's a place that is entrepreneurial, but at the same time does the right thing by people. And I think there's a lot to be said for places that can kind of project that image around the world, that it is in our DNA, as Lou said. But if, you know, we should embrace this Build Back Better idea, because I think it would further promote Greater Manchester as a, you know, as a place that people should look at, come to, invest in. So that's the way I see it, John. And we want to do this with you. You know, as I say, Build Back Better isn't just a call on the government, it's a call on all of us to rethink things, improve things. Maybe one legacy is increased business efficiency. I don't know. Maybe businesses are reshaping themselves as part of this process, and some of their costs and their overheads. So, you know, we do have to turn our brains to the positive, don't we? And try and see if we can capture the benefits of this strange time that we've been living through. But as Lou said, you know, my attention is still very much on the here and now. We are sadly at the top of that UK league table for numbers of cases. I do have concerns that we've kind of gone out early with statements before the regulations are in place, the contact tracing, the mass testing. So I've got to work on those things, and I have to be challenging. If I'm honest, I think the voice of London and the South East has been heard more loudly in recent announcements than the voice of the North West. But it's my job to keep putting that voice out there, both on the here and now, but also the opportunity that lie in the long term. And my final point would be, levelling up seems to be a distant memory, it would seem, in terms of the government's agenda. I said to the Prime Minister on a call a week or so ago, it's not just got to come back, it's got to come back with a vengeance. The truth of the matter is, the health crisis has hit the poorest communities hardest, and that could be true of the economic crisis as well, which is about to follow. So if you're to mitigate the effects of both of those things, you've got to get on with levelling up and give GMCA, the Greater Manchester LEP, proper devolved funding so that we can get on and deal with some of these things and put meaning behind Build Back Better.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much. Sadly, we're coming to an end, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you for all the fantastic questions, which will get answered on an FAQ. There's been some really interesting ones, which I hope you found guidance about today, and indeed some comfort from the answers. I think it's fair to say there are a few takeaways. I think we're all in agreement it's still fast moving, and there's still a deal of uncertainty. But there is continued support and help at hand, and I think that's been well documented today and articulated by our guests. And we've got a fantastic campaign to get behind, which is Build Back Better. So please do get behind that, and you'll see on the screen now that there are ways that you can get involved, and do log on to that. I'd really like to thank our guests, Andy Burnham, Lou Cordwell and Mark Hughes. And again, I want to take the liberty of saying a huge thank you to you on behalf of the business community for your contributions today, and for all that you're doing, providing guidance and support and calm, clear and concise communications. I say this all the time, but I really mean it. You're definitely giving the city region a big professional hug right now, and we need it. So thank you, we appreciate it. And finally, to Growth Company and Greater Manchester Local Enterprise Partnership for enabling this webinar to happen. Thank you.